This is Ross Coulthard, and you are listening to That UFO Podcast.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to That UFO Podcast. My name is Andy, and I am delighted for his long overdue first appearance on the podcast. We have the creator of the Black Vault, theblackvault.com, author, researcher, and I think most importantly, a father of two young children, very similar to myself. I've got John Greenwald. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's really cool timing because as we record this, it's the 12th of August, just gone 7 p.m. in the UK, 11 a.m. Pacific, your time. The Calvine photo has just dropped. It wasn't something I was going to discuss on the podcast, but we've briefly chatted off air on it, and I just thought it might be a good thing to bring up quickly because when this goes out on Monday, the 15th of August, people will have seen this. It's already been retweeted by Joe Rogan's Twitter account. It's been picked up by various news outlets already, and I'm sure that'll go a bit wider spread. The Calvine photo, I'm sure, is one you know very well. You've been in this game a long time. It's a photograph that was allegedly taken in Scotland in the early 90s of a UFO. Nick Pope has built a lot of his career around the myth of this photograph, as he famously had it on his desk, apparently. And it was taken away. We've since seen the black and white negative come out. And just today, my colleagues at UAP Media, including Vinnie Adams and Dr. David Clark, have managed to release the original photograph. And it shows the kind of diamond-shaped craft from what we can see with the quality of the photo, followed by a kind of unknown military aircraft in the background. Some of my colleagues are saying they assume it's a US Harrier jet, but they're not quite sure exactly what make and model, just again with the quality. You've seen the photo, you've seen the article, links will be in the description. Yeah. What are your initial thoughts?
You know, it's great to actually see it if it really is. I'm always skeptical. I know that may come as a surprise to some people, but whenever something either leaks out or comes out for the first time, I'm always apprehensive to go, this is it. It's not that I'm doubting anybody who did the research. It sounds all legit, but what I did right before the program, and literally, as you mentioned, it just dropped. Like I just found out about it, I would say probably within the last hour or so, but went to my longtime friend, Nick Pope, and said, hey, I know you've seen the real thing. Can you comment on it? He also tweeted this comment, and I'll read it just to make sure that I don't misquote him, but
sure.
He says, quote, "It's my policy not to comment on leaked information, especially if it might be classified. So until I receive Ministry of Defense advice, I can neither confirm nor deny if this is the picture that was displayed on my office wall when I ran the MOD's UFO desk," unquote. So I was asking him if I could tweet that as well. And apparently he already did. So I retweeted it right before the program. So that being said, I have no real doubts up front that it's not the real photograph, but what it depicts is kind of the question mark. Are we talking about proof of alien life? This is a smoking gun, or is this a classified piece of technology from, let's say, the United States that was being flown and got captured on a photograph, and the legend was born ever since? So that I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of unwritten parts of this. And if this is the photo, I hope that there's a higher resolution. If there's a negative, and these answers may already be out there by the time this airs. But, just getting higher resolution scans, what can we figure out? Is the negative available? That kind of stuff, and go from there. But it's exciting. I mean, it really is exciting to finally see it.
It's a really interesting image, and if you don't mind, I asked you before we recorded, just in explaining the process is how this could come out in this photograph. Now, allegedly, we know it was taken by 2 to 3 individuals in Scotland in the early 90s. The story goes they were just in a place that, for one reason or another, happened to have this object fly by. They weren't there expecting it. They weren't government individuals. They were no one special. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time, or the wrong place at the right time, depending how you want to look at it. The story goes again that the negatives in the photograph is sent onto the Daily Record in Scotland, which is one of the big tabloid newspapers. There's not many of them. And from there, it went missing. And ever since, it's never been seen again. Now, if this is an individual's photograph, like we're going to assume for now that it is, and it was published. Why couldn't Nick Pope speak on it? Why do you think Nick may be saying that it's classified when it's someone's personal property? And this was something I was having you explain to me, because I wasn't sure how that exactly would
Sure.
work.
Yeah, I'm more familiar with US copyright law versus what it would be overseas. But in short, I'm not too surprised because, Nick's going to be very, very careful with his previous oaths and security clearances to not overstep. I'm speaking more generally and not necessarily specifically about Nick. But when somebody comes out of the government and they are being asked about material that was not officially released, they have to be very careful not to act like a spokesperson. And even though that may not be their intention, sadly, there will be some that might take it that way and saying endorsed by the MOD because Nick Pope said it. And we all know that that's not the case. But there are some people that might think that, or some journalists that might print it. So it doesn't surprise me that Nick is being careful at this point and wants to ask the MOD, can we talk about this? Can we confirm it? And then we'll get hopefully more of Nick's feedback. But if it was just taken by somebody else, yeah, in a legal sense here in America, the way the copyright would work is that a former government personnel, even with a clearance, could speak about it because it's not a work of the US government or the military. It's not a product of that. And so their security clearance does not go in jeopardy by them talking about what, let's say, Andy or John or Bill or whomever took a picture of. So there's a difference there, but I don't blame Nick for trying to be a little bit careful and trying not to overstep too quickly, since this is something that really just unfolded.
Yeah, that's fair. It's literally just over an hour since it dropped via the Daily Mail. So as the hours and days pass, by the time this comes out, like you say, hopefully we've got some more information, or at least some really interesting questions off the back of it. But thanks for that, John. Listen,
Sure.
let's get into the interview that I had planned now. Always an interesting development, and maybe some more as the days go on from what we hear coming up. John, you are a massive name in the UFO topic. Some people would say you're quite controversial, very skeptical, very outspoken, but I think largely people do tend to respect what you do in the realms of FOIA. But I want to take you back before we get there to your earliest memories of the UFO subject. And do you remember getting, was it movies? Was it a TV show? Was it books? Or is it just something that's maybe always been there?
Well, I've always had the curiosity. I grew up watching the X-Files, definitely through my, I would say, junior high and high school years. X-Files was a popular show and always loved it. I had not started the Black Vault at that point, never thinking that I would want to investigate either government secrets or any aspect of the paranormal seriously. So I would say that I've had a lifelong interest. Always loved sci-fi as well, collected comic books as a kid. So I've always had that interest. But about the age of 15 was when I was on the internet. Google wasn't even a thing back then. When I was surfing, I learned the internet, not to age myself, but on AOL for DOS. So,
Yeah, me too.
For the youngsters out there, like, what the hell's that? But this was, kind of the old school internet. And you start getting into these chat rooms and people talking about UFO stuff, and wasn't underground in a sinister way, but it was just these chat rooms that you would end up in. And my interest would start to grow. And I remember searching, at the time it was Alta Vista, and Alta Vista was the search engine, searched in UFOs. And even at the time, you would get hundreds of thousands of hits on UFOs. But I came across a website that talked about a 4-page government document. It's infamously known as the 1976 Iran incident. And you read through this thing, and in my opinion, it doesn't read like it's real. And I thought, there's no way that this UFO sighting, or UFO incident, I should say, with multiple UFOs shutting down 2 separate F-4 Phantom jets, was real. There's no way that came from the US government. So they talked about this thing called the Freedom of Information Act. They said you can get it too if you doubt the legitimacy, and likely it won't cost you anything. So being 15, I'm like, wow, government's going to send me something for free. I'm all over that. And it's a UFO document. Cool. So I did exactly what they instructed to do. And sure enough, weeks later, it was only like 3 or 4 weeks, got this document in the mail. Now, this was back in 1996. And I read it, and it was real. And I just was hooked at that point, because now you're not talking about AOL chat rooms or BBSs, if anybody remembers those things, and stories that were shared. But now we're talking about official US government documents being sent to me, a 15-year-old kid. This was cool. And I thought, if there was one document on the internet, there has to be more. So I went back to the internet and searched, didn't find anything. And so I thought, you know what? Whatever this Freedom of Information Act thing is, if they sent me one document, maybe there's more. And I started teaching myself how to use the FOIA, file the requests, go after information, and at the same time was teaching myself how to program in HTML. And I thought, if I was looking for a website of government documents, so were others. There had to be at least 2 or 3 on the internet. So I started building a website, and the original rendition of it wasn't even called the Black Vault. I mean, I had all sorts of stuff on there. UFOs was just one section, but it became known through the first couple months as kind of the UFO spot for government documents. And not to go off too much of a tangent, but I used to type them in by hand because I couldn't afford a scanner. And scanners were pretty expensive back then, and they were flatbed. So you would have to go 1 scan and then 2 scan. And it was, kind of tedious. But regardless, I couldn't afford one. And I had created a legend of ASCII characters to depict unreadable characters, blacked out information. And I would try and create the document in text, exactly what I was looking at on paper. And I think I got to about 400 or 500 pages at that point. Before somebody had written me privately and said, "Hey, I want to sponsor you. Let me send you a scanner." And he sent me a used flatbed, and the rest was history. So I started scanning documents. So back to your question, not to go off on a tangent, that's how I started. And that curiosity that I had growing up as a kid and loving comic books and science fiction, and then, talking on internet chat rooms and other people having experiences, going from that into government documents, my curiosity went through the roof. And I was filing requests 50 at a time, 100 at a time, literally sending them out. And most of the agencies at the time, you had to mail it in. So my dad was buying me postage, and then some would take them through email. But I would just file these things and get the documents back and put them online. And each document I got, especially on UFOs, because I dealt with every government secret, increased my curiosity, because that 1976 Iran incident was not a standalone incident. There was so much there to discover. And that's why my curiosity now, 26 years later, hasn't gone down at all, but rather up.
And it's important, like you mentioned, some of those names like Alta Vista and AOL for the older listeners who, not even old, I'm 36 and I remember the AOL discs. There was no Google, like you say. There was no YouTube. You couldn't just go online and look for UFO videos. It wasn't that simple. And even back in the very early days of videos online, they were very poor quality. They could take days to download, and it would be a corrupt file and all that kind of stuff. I remember
Start over.
Yeah, that was at the Jackass movie back in the day. It was the one I tried to get. So there was none of that available. So for you, was the goal to get documents to show you there was some sort of smoking gun proof of alien life, UFOs really do exist? Was that what it was? Or was it just to compile data and collate data?
It's a great question. I'm not entirely sure where I really wanted to be. I mean, if you ask me back then as a 15 and 16-year-old kid, hey, do you think in 25, 26 years from now, you're still going to be running the Black Vault? You're going to have 3.2 million pages online. I'd say you're nuts. But that's where I'm at. What was I looking for? I don't know if I was necessarily looking for the smoking gun, because I didn't think that the government would send me the smoking gun. What I learned early on was that you were going to get pieces to a puzzle. And it was the pieces to the puzzle that you had to figure out how to kind of put them together. And would that create the smoking gun? And this day and age, I think you see it more than all else. In 2022 ufology, you see it, I think, more now than you ever have. And people want the smoking gun in one video, one photograph, one document that's irrefutable, and that's it. That's going to convince me and nothing else. And I think with this topic, what I've learned over the years is you can't do that. You can't expect it. Nothing is that easy. Go away from UFOs and you look at some of the most important realms of scientific research. You didn't have just one thing that proved the biggest scientific discoveries ever. Rather, you had years of research, years of theories, years of failing, thinking that you understood something, but at the end of the day, you realize, no, well, that was a failure. You need that to understand. So in that respect, what I wanted to do was archive the puzzle pieces, because again, if I was looking for it, so were others. And that was the tool we needed. Now, there's nothing wrong with books or documentaries. I've made documentaries for years on History Channel and Discovery Channel, and I've written books. But for me, stepping away from that, I want the raw material, right? That raw data, the documents. That's why on the Black Vault, yes, you'll find my opinions sometimes. You'll find editorialized articles sometimes. But no matter if you see that or not, always the documents are there in full. In full. I don't edit. I don't take out what I don't think you should read or see, or what I think you might not be interested in. No, I dump everything. And that way you have every single puzzle piece. And I think that more than all else is what I've wanted to do since day one, because wasn't sold on the smoking gun being there and that I was set on finding it, but rather I wanted every single puzzle piece there was to create the smoking gun, as many as I can get, and make sure that you and I had access to it.
26 years is an incredible amount of time to put into any passion or labour of love, which was what this started as, for it to continue to the level it has now. What is it about FOIA that appeals to you most?
Some people may not like this answer, but bear with me. For me, documents don't lie, meaning they are physical proof that no matter what I think or what I say, I can back it up with a document. Now, of course, documents can have lies on them. The government can lie to me and so on. But for me, the appeal is that I can go after government documents with a US federal law and regulation that allows me to access it and challenge what a Pentagon spokesperson has said to me, or what a press conference by the Undersecretary of Defense and what he says. You can challenge that. And some people think, well, the FOIA is useless because they won't give you anything that they don't want you to have. And to be honest with you, I have 3.2 million pages overall, but thousands of examples that they are pieces to the puzzle that they did not want me to have, and that I fought through the appeal process and created legal documents and legal arguments to get these documents extracted. So even though the FOIA has its challenges, those types of pieces of evidence can come out there. And that for me is the appeal, because if you really look at it, it's not the government's way of pretending to be transparent, but rather it is the government's obligation to answer my requests, give me the information. And that's when I say the documents don't lie, because that is something that you can take as an official piece of evidence and nobody can say otherwise. Again, what's on the document, that's up for debate. But this is information that didn't come to me from a leak, or didn't come to me from a source that I can't name to you, or wasn't in a box that was handed to me in a dark, deep underground garage somewhere. I just can't tell you who gave it to me. None of those types of stories. This is something with CIA letterhead, CIA signatures, NSA, FBI, DIA, you name it, I've gone after it, and it's official. So for me, it adds a different level of legitimacy. Then the debate comes in of what are we looking at here on the document or on a particular video. And that takes the debate to a whole new level. One thing I always want to point out, and it's the biggest misunderstanding about me by my biggest haters out there, never in 26 years, not once have I said that FOIA was the end all be all, ever. It's not what I use solely. It's just what I use primarily. And I think that that's a big misunderstanding to me, because I get that thrown at me a lot. Well, John didn't get it through FOIA, so he doesn't believe it. That's not true at all, because I have proven actually through FOIA, ironically, some of the biggest lies that the government has given out about the UFO topic. So forgive me for wanting to throw that in there, but I think that
No,
that
it's
is a
okay.
misconception about what I do, that I just think FOIA is the end all be all. Never once have I said that. And I put the challenge out there too, to some people that just continually lob that mud at me. And I go, okay, give me a quote. Where have I said anything like that? And of course I never get responses after that, but it's a misunderstanding. But that aside, the appeal for me is that official seal that you can put on that evidence, and then it becomes a little bit irrefutable to a level that you can then take the next step and start debating, okay, what is this video, what is this photo, or what's on this document?
How does the human element of the FOIA process affect the overall end result of what you get in terms of documents? And by that, what I mean is, we can't be sure that, regardless of the process, there has to be an element of trust that you have in the individuals that they're sending you what you're asking for. And there could be, I'm going to say this very crassly, but a box labeled "Do not send out," regardless of FOIA requests, and that's got the really good stuff in it. Putting it like that, and you're getting all these great documents, and they're getting letterheads, and it's got little bits of information here and there. But is there a trust element that you're getting exactly what you should be getting? Again, for an example, you're aware of Jazz Shaw, the journalist. I
Yeah.
think you've spoken to Jazz.
Mhm.
During our interview a couple of months ago, he mentioned how he FOIA'd a document that he had in his possession and was told that no such document existed. And again, that's an example of, maybe it was the wording, and I'm sure you've come across that many times: appeal, 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 and eventually you get what you want. How does that for you? Where does that trust come into it, that the human element can derail what you're trying to achieve?
That's a great question, because the human element is often forgotten about when dealing with the FOIA, that you're dealing with people on the other side. And it makes it challenging, because you want to believe that they're doing the best job that they can be doing. You want to believe that they want to help you. And in many cases, they do. But in the same respect, there's a lot of people that just don't care about helping you. They don't care about their job, or they don't want these UFO documents out, or whatever I'm requesting. They don't want them out. And you have to have a level of trust that they're adhering to the law. But the great thing about it, away from the human element, is that you can challenge it. So if you feel that there's a FOIA officer that is saying, hey, John, sorry, pal, we got nothing on this, go away. And I believe, based on evidence, that he's wrong, that human element becomes irrelevant, because then what happens is that through the law, I can then file an appeal. That appeal does not go to that same guy that just said, hey, John, I got nothing. That goes to what's called an appellate authority. And what they do is they process your appeal. Now, why is this important? It's generally a different office, a different person, and essentially a different process altogether. So that human element that required trust and required belief in that person, that they are trying to do the best that they can, that then, if you want to challenge it, you can. And that there is a process for another person to come in that in a lot of cases has a higher security clearance, and that they are able to take your appeal and take the case that you put up to argue it and make a decision. And I can tell you that in numerous cases, that person at the appeal level disagreed with the FOIA officer and agreed with me, and I won the appeal. What I call a win. It's technically a granted appeal. I call them wins, because when you get that person to say, John, you put up a good case, I'm going to send that back to that person who said, John, I got nothing. And they have to reopen the case, do it again. And if they come back and give you the same answer, then which is pretty rare. But if they give you the exact same answer, you can essentially challenge it again or take them to court. So there are checks and balances on a system that does rely on the human element a little bit, and trust and belief and hope, crossing our fingers for good luck. it allows you to challenge that and takes it to a different level, which is a good thing. So I hope I understood and answered your question correctly, but
Absolutely.
it's often a very forgotten about element to FOIA that there's a human being on the other side, which is why I always try and be as nice as I can. But man, some of them make it challenging.
I think in general, I've tried on the podcast, no matter what side of an argument I'm falling down on, whether it's talking about FOIA or the US government or NASA or an organization, you're still talking about people, and individuals make up these organizations. And you talk about the government covered up Roswell. That was people covered up Roswell, and they're all dead. And people carried on from them, and people carried on from them, and so on and so forth. So it's the human element, I think, is a massive factor. Many people do forget in this. Do you think, in terms of documents you can FOIA, that we've talked about that potential smoking gun that clearly isn't out there for anyone yet? Are the very best UFO documents even there to be FOIA'd, or do you think those are gone, locked away, kept away, and they're just not part of that process, no matter what you request?
I think there's a level of secrecy that FOIA is not going to touch, not necessarily because the law has a shortcoming, but rather these heavily guarded secrets are known by only a few. So how can the FOIA start blanketing into these dark, deep secret caverns of the CIA or the NSA to start grabbing that material? And it's a tough question to answer because it's very hard to prove. The only thing that you can say and that I can prove is that when you look back in time and you look at how many times, let's say the NSA, I'm getting away from UFOs here for a moment, but the NSA denied certain things through FOIA and through press statements and so on, let's say like the spying programs, and how many times they've lied about that, or FOIA requests that should have brought something up about it, but did not. And they say, hey, we've got nothing on this. Then someone like Edward Snowden comes around and says, well, boom, here you go. And that completely contradicts from the top down press statements, FOIA responses, and so on. That's your proof that there is a untouchable arena here. But it doesn't mean you can't get close to it. It doesn't mean that you can't keep going to that appellate authority or to a judge. And it requires then deeper searches by people with higher classifications. And yeah, if you get lucky, you break a big story. But for me, I think the proof enough is there that there are realms that are going to be untouchable, but primarily because there are a select few people that know those deepest, darkest secrets in some of the most highly classified arenas that exist.
Someone like yourself, like you say, there must be many people FOIA requesting all sorts of things, but you've done it for a long time. You're very good at that. You must get very close to that top level. Maybe not the ones you can't get, but of what's available. Have you ever been dissuaded or had an incline you should stop doing what you're doing? And we hear about people being approached or, knocks on the door, men in black type figures, if you want to say that. But have you ever felt that you should stop because of some kind of outside influence?
I've never had any official request to stop, threats to stop, knocks on my door, nothing like that. I've talked briefly in the past about death threats that have come in from the general public. Last count, I think, was 19 or 20, something like that. And those are the ones that were legitimate, meaning like you could tell was on a different level of some idiot that was just, sending a letter, but nothing was ever official. Do those things make me kind of take pause? As you mentioned, I'm a dad. I've got 2 kids. Is there some crazy person that's going to show up on my lawn one day? Yeah, that always makes me concerned. But that's the internet for you, and dealing with sometimes fringe topics and so on. When it comes to official stuff, I've never run into that. I do believe in the need for government secrecy as much as I'm interested in transparency. I believe that there is a level of secrecy that has to be kept. I come from a family of those that worked in the military and government that were on different levels of secrecy. My father worked on, he says that he didn't have a security clearance, but I'm not sure if I'll find out one day he did. But my dad worked on the space shuttle, worked on the Mars lander, but also worked on space defense initiative programs, the SDI program. which that's where I believe that he would likely have to have a security clearance of some kind. All of that is public. That's not secret or anything like that. But that's the program that they would intercept missiles and stuff like that. My dad worked on some of that. And then my grandfather worked on highly classified, top secret level aircraft missile designs, stuff like that. Sadly, I never got to meet him. But all of that being said, what I wanted to do was set kind of the foundation of why I say there is a level, and I support a level of certain amounts of secrecy. I think it has to be kept. But for me, I will push and push and push until I can get as much transparency as I can, and they will define when I stop. I don't believe they will ever have to, they meaning government, military, those that work in the shadows, they don't have to knock on my door and tell me to stop. Because I think that when you get to that level of secrecy that has to be kept, and I'll push it as far as I can until I get there, that door will be shut well in advance of me getting it, and they don't need to tell me, they'll do it themselves.
Yeah, it's disappointing to hear any guest receives death threats, and there's plenty of people I've disagreed with in the past. John, I've disagreed with many of your tweets or opinions or takes on things, and everyone's entitled to that. Mick West being the biggest naysayer or skeptic online. Again, I've mute Mick West, but that's not me going, haha, I'm hitting the mute button. It's just, I don't agree with a lot of opinions. There's an element of trolling to it as well. I think Mick enjoys a little bit of what he does and getting a rise out of people. It's a British thing. So for me, just mute, move on, and that's it. Fill your timeline with, the news and people you want to see. And I'm all for a bit of healthy debate because, it's nice to see the other side of the fence. So it's disappointing, like you say, when people are going as far as death threats and all that kind of stuff. And I would always just give the advice to folks, just have an argument, debate, and just agree to disagree and move on.
I think that's the fun part of this topic. And it's also the evil side all at once, because we shouldn't all agree, and I don't expect people to agree with me, but that's the fun of it. We don't have the answers yet. I'm always apprehensive if people feel they figured it all out. I think that once we do figure out what these UFO phenomena are, and I use plural, I think that it's probably off the mark of what everybody has been talking about, for years. I think that there's a lot of different facets and aspects. So the fun of it is that debate, but it's so easy to get caught up in the evil side of it as well, where you just get so passionate about what we are believing in and saying, and then the aggression starts. I mean, you just go head to head with people and it escalates. So it's a fascinating aspect to the conversation, because there are some that sure will get heated and passionate, myself included, but there is that line, that you kind of hit and go, all right, I got to go take a break. I'm going to go kick the soccer ball around with my kid, get outside a bit and walk away. Others can't. And for me, it's unfortunate, but it's also fascinating that this topic can just grab you and get you to that point where you do get aggressive, and that you do say things that you wouldn't normally say or do. And so, yeah, I'm fascinated by the topic from that standpoint as well, because it is so much fun, but it can be met with such viciousness. And it's all part of the same arena. And that's what fascinates me about it overall is the people within it and how everybody reacts to news and stories and stuff like that.
One of the more light-hearted enemies I suppose you have would be redactions. And I wanted to know, do you have any examples of some of the most frustrating redactions you've come across within documents?
Keeping with the UFO arena, I think one of the more fascinating and even more recent would be when I was able to get the Office of the Director of National Intelligence to release a redacted version of the classified UAP report from last year. And I worked a long time on that. I had filed the day after the public version came out. I knew that there was a classified version, filed the case that Saturday morning, and pushed hard to get it released. A lot of people said they would never release any of it. I was thankful to get the full 17-page document released. A frustrating redaction, however, were the shapes of UAP, the common shapes. And I think that myself, sure, I was really frustrated at that, but I'm a little used to redactions. the general public, I think, was outraged by those redactions and how ludicrous it is that just the mere shape of something is considered classified. Now, for those who don't follow what I do, I have filed an appeal case on that, specifically targeting quite a few redactions, but the shapes of the UFOs and or UAP and the boxes that they had. So, in my opinion, the way I look at it, I think what we're going to find if they do release it are multiple photographs and drawings. I think there's going to be both. And for those who really follow closely, I have an open bet with Stephen Greenstreet, and I won't let him forget about it, for $100, 100 US, on it will be a combo of photographs and diagrams. But that's a way for me to kind of like lessen the frustration and made it fun and a challenge to get it, by making a bet with Stephen Greenstreet. But regardless, that's what I think we're going to find. But it's frustrating. What is it about a shape? Was it saucer? Is it cube? Is it sphere in a cube or cube in a sphere? Whatever the shape is, why can't you tell me at least that? And that, I think, was pretty frustrating, but hopefully a fight that I will win in the end. Trying to get an update on that case, but I haven't received one yet. So that's one example of a redaction. A lot of names, and this is why these particular redactions are very frustrating. When you're reading a document, exemption B6 in the FOIA is privacy information. So if John Greenwald works for the NSA, this conspiracies are going to start after that. But if I'm just using my name, John Greenwald works for the NSA and I'm in an NSA document, they will redact my name if somebody requests it. So that's exemption B6. So when that goes out, when you read names and you understand when you're reading so-and-so, but it's redacted, says whatever, you can't follow up on that. And those are redactions that you really can't fight. It's very, very rare when you can fight a B6 redaction and get it released. Generally, the names will stay redacted for decades on top of decades because they don't want any invasion of personal privacy. I used an NSA example with my name. They would also use exemption B3, which is an internal statute that protects NSA employees. So why I'm bringing that up is that doubles the challenge to get those names out. Names are important to do your own independent investigation. Talk to the person who wrote the document. See what their experience was. Fill in the blank. But talking to people is the next logical step to any investigation on any topic. But those redactions through FOIA, you can't fight them. So for me as the researcher, I get probably the most frustrated with name redactions, just because you can't fight it. Second up would be national security. And national security included the shapes of UAP, but also that's exemption B1, national security. Those are also very tough to fight, but at least you can somewhat put up an argument to try and fight it. So I would say overall, those are going to be some of the most frustrating redactions that you run into because they are either incredibly difficult or impossible to fight.
Do you care to speculate, or maybe or have a good idea as to why the shapes were redacted?
I wish I did know. It would be pure speculation. Obviously, the shapes could potentially identify foreign, but still unidentified technology platforms, if that makes sense. So when you start locking in that they're seeing certain identifiable shapes, then 5 years from now, we realize that China had a classified drone of that shape. We now realize that for however many years, that particular shape, i.e. a Chinese drone, was successfully infiltrating U.S. military airspace, and the military couldn't figure it out. So this is that level of secrecy that I teeter on the edge of, well, I want to know, but I kind of understand that we shouldn't know. And that is you release your vulnerabilities, that you are showing the planet these are our weaknesses. And yes, a shape could potentially identify that. So there are ways to look at this that are frustrating, but you can understand why they would keep certain things secret. And that would be one way. The other way is if there's a shape of something that fits absolutely nothing, then what do you do? And I think the general public will really start to speculate, okay, is this proof that there is extraterrestrial technology in our airspace, which is a big possibility? We don't know. So that in itself is a national security risk to the United States. Because when you start admitting that now, not only do you have zero idea what the technology is, but it has been successfully infiltrating our airspace without us able to defend ourselves for decades, that in itself is a national security concern, because not only does it release our vulnerabilities, but on top of that, you're starting to essentially terrify the American people that you are no longer in control of your own airspace. And I think that there's a lot of weight to that theory that alien or not, it doesn't matter. But the true national security risk is admitting you're weak and that you can't defend yourself. All that I think can be deduced from shapes, and then it just kind of spirals from there. So I still do hope I win that appeal, but there's some speculation on why they may not allow me to win that one.
No, that's interesting. On the breaking news podcast I done at the time of the release, and obviously at the release of your classified FOIA, that was what I had heard as well and spoke about on the podcast, that if there were foreign adversarial drone technology, it may be one, they don't want them to know that they've got pictures of them, but also, like you say, there's that element of weakness and, you know, we don't know what these are, how they're operating, and the information they're gathering. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. And separately, we do hope secretly there's that. And I'm sure the 15-year-old John Greenwald has that inkling of imagine seeing that come through and there's a flying saucer picture or something like that. Knowing our luck, it's going to come back that the really good ones would be the drawings, which I imagine, yeah, there's going to be some artist's impressions, which again would be frustrating, but you never know. Like the Calvine photo, it may come out eventually. I want to ask you, John, people often talk about the core story, and many people have different versions of this. What for you would be the core story when it comes to how the US government has handled the UFO subject?
The core story is in, like, just overall how they've handled it in the last...
Or why they've handled it from 1947. Let's go back to the Roswell time to now. What do you think they're trying to keep from the public? Is there that element of at first it was something unknown, or is it something else that's just spiraled out of control?
I think it's kind of all of the above and then some. I think for me, I have to separate pre-2017 and 2017 and beyond to properly answer that. Before 2017, I think for decades, I can comfortably, without any shadow of a doubt, and so can others, prove the UFO cover-up using their own evidence, using documentation, disproving press statements, going against their own press conferences, all by using their own documentation. So for me, the lie didn't work. And that for me is the core of their story from 47 on. So even if you ignore Roswell, I believe that Project Blue Book, enough evidence exists to show that that was not an investigation. It may have been in the early days, but rather its intent was to be an explanation. I believe that Dr. J. Allen Hynek was a prime piece of proof of that he goes in there and his job is to debunk. I did a show for History Channel. We really dug in deep on J. Allen Hynek's life and what his intent was. And it was fascinating to see him as a scientist shift from that, hey, there's nothing to this. UFOs are explainable, no evidence. And he'd go in and he'd, essentially debunk. As the years progressed, more cases came across his desk. I believe it was Delphos or Socorro that ultimately changed his mind. I think it's speculated it was Socorro. But regardless, he had this shift. And that shift was, there's something to this. We have to investigate. And you see that with his actions post Blue Book. And he comes out as a scientist and he wants to pursue the topic more. one of the coolest discoveries wasn't even through FOIA, but that came across my desk, was a researcher by the name of Rob Mercer. And Rob Mercer was essentially surfing eBay and Craigslist for UFO memorabilia, whatever UFO stuff he could find. And to quickly summarize the story, Rob had come across this advertisement for original Project Blue Book documents that were found in a garage in Ohio. And so Rob immediately contacts the person. And again, summarizing the story, apparently these people had just purchased a home, bunch of ratty old boxes in the garage. All these documents were inside. Rob Mercer purchases them, tracks down the original homeowner who left them there behind. Turns out was one of the original Project Blue Book investigators. At the time, I believe he was a lieutenant. His name was Carmen Morano. So Rob tracks him down. Morano still had material left. So he left some behind, but he also took some with him to his new home. Rob goes out, gets all that stuff too. And Rob brings it back, gets in contact with me. I fall in love with the story because it's awesome. It's irrefutable. Carmen Morano's story checks out. You can see his name in some of the documents, not the ones found in the garage, but official documentation. So really kind of cool stuff. So I digitized the whole thing, archived the whole thing. Rob had digitized the majority of it. And so we put it online. Okay, why am I telling you that story other than it's pretty darn cool? If you look at those documents, a lot of the documents never made it to the National Archives and exist in the National Archives collection of Project Blue Book. When you look inside, there was original correspondence from Dr. J. Allen Hynek to, at the time, Hector Quintanilla, who was the head of Project Blue Book, but on the military side. And Hynek was trying throughout multiple letters, and you can see his signature and everything, to get Quintanilla to agree to reopen the cases that they debunked. That Hynek had this shift that realized, hey, this is wrong, that we are debunking whatever, but it's wrong. All of these cases, and he specifically named some of them, should be reopened and so on. So when you look at that era, you realize that entire couple decades from 47 to 69 through Grudge, Sign, and Project Blue Book was a farce. After Project Blue Book ended, a lot of this evidence comes out. We had speculation that Blue Book was a joke. Now I think we have proof that it was a joke. Now fast forward through the decades, they lied through their teeth. But through FOIA, you can see that every government agency, including the intelligence community, had classified up to top secret documents on UFOs, the majority of which shouldn't exist. If you really dig in, they display technology that we don't have at the time, and in some cases don't even have today. And you go, wow, they're saying one thing, evidence shows another. That's pre-2017. 2017 comes around, and in my opinion, changes everything. Because now, aside from the debate of ATIP, UFOs, no UFOs, doesn't really matter. To the government, they had to handle this UAP issue, which everybody was pushing. So for me, to answer the second part of this answer, post 2017, they said, okay, now we got to start talking about UAP and not deny it. Now we got to admit that we're looking into it because it is a threat. It's a hot topic. Everybody's printing stuff about it and asking questions. So let's meet it head on. And it became, in my opinion, a counterintelligence asset in itself to the American military and the American government. Why I say that is because now they can do a couple things all rolled into what we're seeing unfold. I'll start off with, again, another misconception about me. I do believe there is a percentage of these phenomena that are real, unidentified, and an extraterrestrial connection has not been ruled out. I can't tell you 100% because I don't know, but I'm just saying I haven't seen enough to rule that out. So I believe that there is a percentage here that you, me, your audience wants to see. But in what we're seeing now, that percentage, and albeit probably a small one in the grander scheme of things, is being covered up. Because in the same cover-up, you can now cover up our secret technology, are classified platforms that we know we're testing. History shows us that. We've been doing it for decades on top of decades. And a lot of those have been the result of UFO sightings. Not all, but definitely some. But then you also, in that same cover up what we know about our adversaries and play dumb and say, hey, we have no idea what was spooking our ship out there while we were, and I'm using this as a broad example, but in 2004 in the Nimitz, what if that was a foreign technology, right? Hypothetically speaking. Well, now the Navy just goes, we have no idea what it was. And the foreign power that actually was responsible for that is sitting back going, wow, do they really not know it was us? Or do they know? And this is all a lie, smokescreen. That's the textbook definition of counterintelligence. Ensure that your enemy has absolutely no idea what you're talking about. So I think people cringe when they start hearing like, oh my gosh, the Nimitz, no way it could be American technology. It's still a possibility. It just is. People hate me for saying it, but it is a possibility. And I think that when you step away from that personal connection that we all have to this, and it's easy to not be able to do that. I find myself sometimes not being able to do that myself, but step away and look at it in a broader scope. The counterintelligence value to this conversation in 2022 is a gold mine, because they are able to openly admit they look at UAP, give the aura of transparency, but in the process, cover everything up. In my opinion, it's kind of brilliant.
It's a very fair argument, and obviously you make those points well. I've said openly on the podcast before, and I suppose it's easier not being an American citizen, that I don't believe that the US government or any government or superpower wouldn't test things out on their own navy or personnel. So while personally I've said before, and people can go back and check, and many listeners no doubt do, I believe the Tic Tac event was non-human origin. However, I've always said that if it came out that tomorrow, and we're going to talk about Lue Elizondo in a minute, Lue Elizondo was out lying, and the US government, it was US technology, and they were testing out on their own Navy carrier group, and it was a nuclear carrier group, and it was really dangerous, I wouldn't be shocked at that, because there's enough evidence to show governments have tested some horrible things out on their own personnel in the past. So the questions for me, though, on things like the Tic Tac is, if it is adversarial or US technology, where did they get that level of technology where it's performing these incredible maneuvers? And that doesn't mean the conversation doesn't go back to, did they recover crashed alien technology somewhere down the line? When did they break, these incredible speeds? How can they perform these incredible maneuvers? Because like you say, we'll no doubt have some amazing tech, but to perform the way it does, it's just a whole load of questions come out. I've mentioned Lue, and it's a good time to bring it up. I think you had Lue's first official interview back in February, 2021 now, was it? When he first came out?
I think it was January. It was just after New Year's. Yeah. And I'm not sure if it was the very first. So I don't want to say that with certainty. But yeah, I think it was one of his very early on. And then shortly after that first interview I did with him, the avalanche of podcasts and radio shows commenced, and he definitely did the rounds. But yeah, I think that was COVID has kind of squashed everything in my brain. I think 2021. I think the beginning of 2021.
Well, I started this pod in May 2020, and from what I remember, I think I was third in the queue. I think it was you, and then Ryan Sprague, and then myself. Roughly, that was the order, because I watched both of yours in preparing for mine and tried to make it something very different. And I recommend people go back and listen to those early interviews with Lue. And like you say, it seems like a lot longer, I think, than 18 months ago, but that's when it was. Now, that was Lue coming out, and I remember he started those interviews with yourself, with Ryan, and with myself, apologising for them not having happened earlier. He had been part of To the Stars Academy. He had just left To the Stars Academy, and it seems through some miscommunications, let's say, that he wasn't getting interview requests, as we were kind of told. Your interview was conducted really respectably. You had been, I don't think before that I remember you being a critic of Lue, but there was a lot of questions being asked. You got Lue on. How did you feel before your interview with Lue? during and then after, had your opinion changed at all? Because I would think it's fair to say since then, you still have a lot of questions that would look like you're very distrustful of, is it fair to say, Lue, or is it a general distrust of government officials?
So a great question, and happy to address it. For me, it's hard to separate Lue as the former government guy versus Lue as a person when it comes to the general public. For me, I separate it. That's how I always looked at it. And some people, I think, took that as a personal attack against Luis Elizondo, the man, the human being. And I never intended for that. And if you remember from my interview, I had started off with an apology to him that if anything had seemed like a personal attack, that it wasn't. It's not that I distrust government people overall, but there is a lot of evidence to support you shouldn't trust 100% government people overall. It's just fact, right? And especially, and I'm sorry, I'll probably get hate mail, but he's counterintelligence, right? So we always have to question. But to his credit, from almost day one, like his interview, I think he did with Open Minds, he wanted the questions. He said, you should question everything, even me. And that's slight paraphrasing, but he said, even me. And that was always the mindset that I took. In fact, I have a big page on the Black Vault where I talk about TTSA and Elizondo's claims and DOD, and then ended up branching that off because it got gigantic. But at the very top, I quoted Luis Elizondo because I think that that was very admirable of him. I wish his biggest fans would understand that questioning him is what he really was essentially saying in the beginning, which is where I was from day one. I don't know the inner workings of TTSA. So to go back to your question, in the very beginning, when he said that he wasn't informed that we were trying to interview him, I don't like the hearsay thing. I was told differently. I was told he was aware. So that being said, I don't know where that came from. To the Stars Academy directly told me, if your audience is asking, where did you hear that from? I could tell you, Carrie DeLonge had talked to Luis Elizondo or told me directly. If there's some kind of lying there by her, that's between them. I don't want to get into it, but there was those types of discrepancies that were kind of being seen. So leading up to the interview, I had found a way to contact Luis Elizondo. That had never been done before. I always had to go through the TTSA PR people like Carrie DeLonge. And later they got a British PR firm. I'm not sure why they went into the UK for that, but regardless, it just kind of spiraled from there because they had a couple firms thereafter, and it was very difficult to get them on the record. But I found a way to get directly to Luis Elizondo, and I kind of put it out all on the table. I'm like, hey, the internet is really crappy when it comes to this. What you're hearing is probably not what I'm saying. So here's what I'm doing. Here's what I'm questioning. Here's what I want to find out. And can we do an interview? And this is why I'd want to do it. So really condensing the story, he agreed, to his credit, and the interview is what you saw. Also, to his credit, he never had any, don't ask me about this, don't ask me about that. I knew that I would push him to the point of I have an NDA or a security clearance, but regardless, to his credit, he never said, don't ask me about anything. Now, again, I'm trying not to be too long-winded, which I know I can tend to be.
No, please, listen, just go for it. It's fine.
So the other part of your question, how did I feel during and after? I can tell you that the majority of the questions I feel still to this day in August of 2022 remain unanswered. And some that were answered during that are great. And in fact, I've said this 1,000 times, a lot of the biggest concerns I have likely do have easy or logical answers to them, but nobody's ever really addressed them before. And so I feel like, just to give some examples, the videos, the fact that Luis Elizondo, in my interview with him, which I think is a very underrated part of my conversation with him, he said he never intended for those videos to be out, and he was not the one that gave them to TTSA. and that he had no knowledge of the fact that they had them until they were aired by the New York Times or published by the New York Times in December. Now, he was working for the organization for months at that point. So how do you not know that the videos that internally you were going after to use in an internal database for government use only somehow slipped out of the government without your knowledge and somehow went to the corporation that you're now working for, and somehow they never told you for months until December when you found out like the rest of us did? That to me was the most surprising part of the interview, and I did not expect that, because I don't feel that was, somebody's not telling me the truth, right? I mean, how do we accept that as part of the story? Because when you look at then the interview that Luis Elizondo did with George Knapp on Coast to Coast, he went into detail about the process that he did to get the videos out with the DD Form 1910. All of us, I'm sure, probably, unless you work for the DOD, didn't know what the heck a DD Form 1910 was, myself included. I had no idea. So he outlined the whole process, but he never in George Knapp's interview said, yeah, well, I have no idea how these things got out. It was not until the documentation came out through FOIA that showed there was a lot more to the story, and that the story we were getting about the videos and the TTSA's claim about them going through the quote unquote declassification process, all of that was untrue. And so when I had asked him about that grander story, I feel that wasn't answered. So walking away, again, to your question, I was a little sad, that I didn't get the answers that I wanted. Some people wanted me to push harder, and I'm not going to do that. I mean, I try and remain respectful in interviews. If I say, what color's the house, and you refuse to say that it's blue, I'm not going to sit there and put a spotlight on you and say blue, say blue. I mean, to put it simplistically, I don't do that. So I let him answer the way he wanted to answer, followed up and pushed where I could. And that was it. Post that interview, I did a couple more with him. I brought him back on when I uncovered the destruction of his emails. So we had post conversations from that. And, I really like the guy. I really, truly do. And that's what's frustrating for me, is from a personal level, we had so many private conversations along with public ones that I had no problem with the guy on a personal level. He's likable. He's cool. He's fun to talk to because we kind of speak the same language. I've been digging into government secrets forever. And obviously he's like the guy that keeps part of these secrets. So we kind of, in my opinion, spoke the same language a little bit. But it just got weird as time went on. And, a lot of these conversations online that happened away from me, but namely some of what a lot of people, myself included, called drama, started coming out. And, the felon list, if you want to get into that, I'm happy. But that coming out, and the use of sock puppet accounts, those sock puppet accounts were coming after me. It just got weird, which is unfortunate. So long-winded way of answering your question, but that's the progression from the TTSA days to my interview and beyond. It's sadly never easy. It's never black and white, and it's never easy.
I stay away from the drama stuff on this podcast. It's there for
which
people
is
to
fine.
see. And yeah, I tend to mute a lot of that stuff, because what's the point ultimately?
Yeah.
When you have to put your phone down and deal with your screaming kids, or make dinner, or you're
Totally.
walking around. I walk around supermarkets replying to listeners sometimes, and I'm like, I could do without that. So
Yeah.
I tend to stay away from it. But is there a place where, and you're right, there have been times from what Lewis said, and this goes for many officials and other people within the inner workings of what Lewis has been involved in, what they say at one point over time changes, and that may be subtly, or it may be in a kind of grander scale. And like you say, there are certain ways, like the declassification of the videos, that wasn't necessarily clear and then got a little bit clouded. Can you see why sometimes not working for the NSA, like let's clear that up, you don't, like you say, and
Yeah.
I don't, that there are just things we don't understand why they say things how they are. But in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't change that Lue did work where he said he did. He worked on the program he said he did. Or for you, does it still just muddy the waters too much that it does affect the overall picture?
Well, I think one thing to look at, and I'll go back to what I said earlier, and this is a prime example of it, that the documents don't lie. And you look at the emails between Mr. Elizondo and DOPSR, which is that organization within the DOD that reviews the videos. And then you also look at the documentation from the Air Force Office of Special Investigation, AFOSI, that investigated the release of the 3 UAP videos, Go Fast, Gimbal, and FLIR. To me, those documents contradict the story. And that's where I say documents don't lie. If he wants to refute what's in those documents, then I'd be curious to hear that. But to your question, does it muddy the waters? Absolutely, it muddies the waters. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't be in this conversation. I'm glad that he is. It doesn't mean that he shouldn't, let's say, testify in front of Congress under oath, because, hey, I'm all for it. And I hope the right questions are asked. I'm not interested in drama, provoking questions by Congress, mind you. I'm just talking about legitimate questions about what he did, what they found out, and why is there this pushback by the DOD to say, no, you didn't do that. And I think that that's a legitimate question that doesn't encourage the drama, but rather, as somebody who's watched this cover up for 26 years, and it being a cover up that's gone on for decades and decades prior to me being born, those are legitimate questions. Because of Mr. Elizondo being a member of the U.S. military and somebody who has excellent evaluations within the DOD, and we've seen them now coming out with the IG complaint, if they are lying about him, we should know that. And I understand that Mr. Elizondo is saying they're lying, and that's great. They could very well be true. I want to see all this under oath. I want to see the Undersecretary of Defense come in as, the leader of OUSDI and say, hey, this is a lie that the Pentagon spokespeople put out, and I'm here to correct it, or I'm here to support it, however that plays out. Why that's important is because it plays into the foundation of the conversation we're having now. Not you and I, but I'm talking about the grander conversation of UAP. Doesn't take away from the legitimacy of the important cases like Nimitz and so on and so forth that deserve it, but rather, how did we get here? And I am that person that wants every single puzzle piece. So yeah, I would love to see him stay a part of the conversation. I'd love to see him under oath. And I'd love to see what type of information comes out and goes from there. So does it muddy the water in the process? In my opinion, I think we've proven it does. I do. And the videos are a prime example. There's quite a few others, but it muddies the water. But does that mean that we shouldn't have the conversation? In my opinion, no. I think we should continue to have it. I hope he stays a part of it. And we get to know more of the overall story, hopefully sooner than later.
Is all of this a consequence, though, of what we talked about earlier when I mentioned, the human element of the FOIA process causes issues because people are individuals by their very nature? And even though we put people in positions of authority, and I'm not talking necessarily about Lue here, but even your Susan Gough or your Undersecretary of Defense, your President of the United States, whoever it may be, they are still human and they still make mistakes and they still have their own biases and potentially their own agendas. And that doesn't necessarily mean it can be black and white that, well, maybe Lue did lie a little bit, but for a certain reason we don't know. And do you know what? Maybe the DOD isn't necessarily lying when they say X, but Y, Z, and A all comes into it as well. And that just the fact there are so many cogs in the wheel can make it a very complicated situation where there are shades of grey everywhere. And I just wonder, does that play into this, that maybe they're lying a little bit, maybe they're all telling the truth a little bit, and maybe there's something else in between as well? And just with the UFO topic, wouldn't that just be the thing? Because that's what the very UFO topic is like. Why don't we have good pictures? Why don't we have good videos? There's always a reason. And I just wonder, is that the same with all these officials and intelligence officials and government officials?
It's you put it eloquently and brilliantly. I believe that there are other layers of this onion on both sides of that particular part of the conversation, meaning the Luis Elizondo and that side and the government side, that there are layers of the onion on both sides that have yet to be revealed. I feel 100% confident to say that. But does that mean that both sides are kind of telling the truth, but also kind of not? Likely so. And I think that we all need to have that conversation, and we definitely won't all agree. But I think that if you go back to 2000, it was probably around April of 2018 when I finally started showing that skepticism openly that you referred to. And the reason why it was then was that December, I was getting FOIA responses that I filed in October, because that October of 2017 was when Luis Elizondo did the press conference with TTSA.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward, it took months for what I called the red flags to start showing up, and things weren't starting to line up. Beginning of 2018, the press officers got involved, and it just got weird throughout the next few months. I was trying to get in contact with Luis Elizondo to clear things up. Garry DeLonge essentially was kind of that wall in between, and then it just kind of went from there. But going back to that time frame, I think is when the skepticism really started for me. And when you look at it, the reaction from the general public, and how dare you say he would ever lie? How dare you say that we don't have the full story from him? How dare you say that the videos didn't come out, 100% legit? And I go back to the videos because that's the biggest part of this debate, and in my opinion, the most easily provable fallacy from those beginning days, that we were not told the truth about how these things came out. And evidence definitely proves that, in my opinion, but the evidence is there. So when you go back to that and you see the public's reaction, like, there's no way that this wasn't legit. Stop making an issue out of it. Well, since then, we've learned that AFOSI agreed with what I was saying publicly, not with me personally, but that idea that these videos didn't come out legitimately. And if you don't believe me and you don't want to believe the government, that's fine. Believe Christopher Mellon, because he said it too. He said that rules were bent to get these videos out. So we've solidified that something went awry there. So now fast forward, if we start accepting acceptable lies, where do we draw the line? And it's that age-old question, do the ends justify the means? And if you're going to lie to justify a great outcome, and we've got congressional hearings now, and hoorah, and there's legislation. So who cares about the videos? Who cares if he lied? Who cares if whomever lied? We're getting progress. Does that justify it? And for me, it's the house of cards scenario. If you build a house of cards with a weak foundation, what's going to happen? It's going to fall. And we've seen stuff like this before. You go back to the mid to late 1960s and you see the push during the end of the Blue Book days, Gerald Ford specifically, and I have all the documentation from Gerald Ford's library. This was another show I did for History Channel, which was a lot of fun for me, because you see the push that Gerald Ford, then Congressman Ford, was doing to get the UAP topic in front of the Senate, have hearings, get legislation. It was a very serious problem in his home state, but much bigger for the United States. It was a national security concern, this and that. And you push, and they did convene a group to come together, and they did investigate it towards the end of the 1960s. And what did we get? We got a farce report that ended Project Blue Book, said nothing was to the UFO phenomena, and closed the book, literally and figuratively. And Project Blue Book was closed with the Condon Committee report. So you look at that and juxtapose that with today, we're seeing very similar things play out. I hope it doesn't play out that way, but rather we've seen this before. And so I'm eager to see now moving forward how much those half-truths are going to play a role in this. That if Congress was misled, not saying by anybody specifically, but by the overall story. I don't know what your views are on the Wilson Davis stuff, but I'll use this as an example. Even if you believe them to depict real events, they are highly controversial, and Admiral Wilson denies them. So do they waste congressional time by pulling in Admiral Wilson and challenging his open statements, or what? I'm not really sure. But let's say they do, and that whole thing, you realize that they were kind of told these stories, that's the Congress and the senators finally realize, oh, So this house of cards really wasn't built on a strong foundation, and we threw all of our, time and effort into this. Are we going to potentially backfire? So that's where I feel that we need to have the conversation of what is an acceptable lie, because end of 2017, beginning of 2018, we were dealing with 100% truths according to the general public, that those that came out of the government were not lying to us, and we needed to take the next step. Now here we are in 2022 going, and I'm not putting this on you, by the way, but this actually is part of the bigger conversation. Well, they lied, but it's okay that they lied, because we're getting hearings and so on. Do the ends justify the means? And I'm not here to say yay or nay, by the way, but rather pose the question and go, we need to take a step back. We need to look and see what history has taught us through the 1960s with Condon and so on. And are we leading down that path? Are the Wilson Davis notes what you want to put in front of everything else? Are half truths what you want to put in front of everything else? I don't have the answer to that, but rather it's a conversation I think collectively we should all have, and I hope we do.
Yeah, there's a few really good points in there, and it's quite a divisive one as to how important even this topic should be in terms of discussion right now. And I've said before, like, I would love to hear the UFO topic discussed more openly in US Congress, but especially here in the UK as well. Maybe that changes, maybe it doesn't in the near future. But someone like my wife is less concerned about the UFO topic and more concerned about the cost of our gas and electric bills coming up.
Sure.
And how much it costs to put fuel in the car and food on the table. And some people do struggle with that in the UFO community, and this is the biggest story of all time. Yes, it is. But right now, the question would be, how does this affect people right now? And do you know what? They still go to work tomorrow. There's no flying cars. We don't all get free fuel when we find out aliens are real. That doesn't happen overnight. There's all those conversations. And for me, that's a really interesting one. And I can see both sides of it. I can. And I go back to your point also about this has happened before. And I empathize with people who have been in this topic far longer even than you. People who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s who contact me on DMs or email, and they say that they really hope this is the time it changes, but they've seen it before. And maybe people far younger don't realize that. And yet it looks great now because we're living the moment. And we've got social media, which is so different, and we get everything instantly. And it's not enough. You've got to have it yesterday, 2 weeks ago. But yeah, there is an element you have to admit of this has happened before in an extent, in a way. But hopefully the outcome's different this time, and we're people like me back individuals like Lue, hoping that the truths he is telling come to fruition. I'm going to ask you soon about Gary Nolan, again, an individual who's becoming more prominent and had a really good interview with Tucker Carlson recently as well. So hoping that this time things do change, but also fully prepared for the moment it does go back in the box in some way, shape, or form. As much as people like to say it's not going back in the box now, the genie's not going back in the bottle. I'm sure people said that last time, long before there was AOL, DOS chats, and everything like that. It was back in the Blue Book days. There would have been sure newsletters or whatnot going back about in the 60s and 70s and 80s. So, but yes, some really good points there, John, well made as well. And there's some things there I fall on the side of, well, I believe Lou. I think he worked where he did, but I also think there have been mistruths down the line by him and others for reasons that I have no right to know and will never find out, more than likely as well. A lot of stuff I do want to still get to in the time I've got left, John. You've been really good. To the Stars Academy, you've touched on. What are your thoughts on To the Stars Academy as an organisation? Now, To the Stars was about before and after as a media company. Tom DeLonge's a wild cat in his own right, and I've followed his musical career since a kid. A big fan of his music. But then he comes out with all these stories. He puts together this incredible team of individuals with a government background. We know he was working with Podesta and potentially wanted to work with the Clintons, and that kind of fell through. What do you think about the formation of To the Stars Academy? What it achieved in a short time, but then how it's evolved or devolved, depending how people look at it?
I, away from the Black Vault, started a business about 5-6 years ago. I am a 100% supporter of anybody who starts a business, any entrepreneur, fully support that. Always from day one, I've wished Tom DeLonge luck. and best wishes for his success. That's my business hat. When I put the UFO hat on, seeing what they wanted to do in the beginning, you could tell they were biting off way more than they could chew. So it's exciting to see that somebody wanted to lead the effort to build a space plane and look at the people he brought together and so on. But the TTSA that was announced in October of 2017 is not the one that you see today. Now
Sure.
we're talking about a production company. I live in Los Angeles. I worked in television for more than a decade as a director and producer writer. Those are a dime a dozen. Now, that's not to take away from his work or even a judgment on quality, but rather that's a totally different endeavor than what it was a few years back. What I think about that, though, is that, again, wish him the best of luck. But what's frustrating is the UFO aspect to it. In the beginning, always gave him credit for this too. There is no doubt that he started the ball rolling, getting people talking. Part of that was Luis Elizondo coming out onto the stage and speaking publicly. Part of it was just Tom DeLonge, rock star, crazy guy. And I say that with love, but crazy guy saying crazy things. He's getting headlines, right? And that's, I think, what people started to look at. And on top of that, you got to look at those things generate hits and clicks for a dying media industry. So there's kind of a whole lot rolled into the success of this story. But there's no doubt that it was spearheaded by TTSA, led by Tom DeLonge. But fast forward now, the thing that I honed in on was wishing him good luck with the business. But I honed in on that Army agreement that he made when he acquired multiple pieces of alleged UAP, created a deal with the same entity that he spent so long telling us was lying about UAP, and made a deal with them and said, I'll share our scientific results with you if you share your expertise and equipment with us. And that was the Army CRADA agreement. And I followed that from literally like the moment it was announced, because I was fascinated by it. The fact that the Army would get in bed, sorry for the terminology there, but get in bed with an organization that's touting UAP material and stories and so on. And the fact that they would take their resources. I don't want to say waste, because it's very important. But in their eyes, with a topic that they really just don't want to touch, and go, yeah, bring your UFO stuff to us and we'll test it. It was just bizarre. And I started working on stories about it. I've written, I think, about four big stories since the CRADA was announced, working to get statements from Tom DeLonge, TTSA, and also statements from the Army. I can tell you, to summarize my answer, the Army is more transparent about that than TTSA. Why? It's not because it was John Greenwald, because I know I'm hated within that circle, but it's anybody who reached out to them. They just don't want to talk about it. Even investors during the meetings, they were very vague about what they were doing. Army was the only one that was giving me actual answers. I pushed it as far as I could until FOIA exemptions apply and the corporate entity, the intellectual property owner, because it's considered their intellectual property, they have to make the decision on what they will release. So I've done multiple stories on it. Why I bring that up is how to answer your question. I've been very upset to see that. One of the pieces that they have is something that I'm personally connected to, because I put the witness on television multiple times on the History Channel. We conducted scientific tests and profiled his story because I was very drawn to it. He passed multiple lie detector tests, just an honest guy. Little controversial with some of the things he did, trying to get exposure for the UFO thing, but his name was Bob White. And all in all, scientists were confused by this piece. They were genuinely and passionately into getting answers. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I bring up Bob, who has now passed away, but Larry, who last name is Sikander, who now owns the piece and is or was working with TTSA on this particular program, I feel that they got, these are my words, just for the record, I feel that they got screwed over. I feel that they were given promises that were not kept. And that's frustrating to me, because as a organization, meaning TTSA, who's advocating for transparency, who's saying, hey, give me your stuff, lend me your stuff, or sell me your stuff, in the case of Linda Moulton Howe, they get all this stuff, and then they just don't share anything or say anything or whatever. And for those who aren't aware, because it didn't get national coverage, but I wrote a article getting the Army to confirm that they have run tests on the UAP or alleged UAP material.
Sure.
Tests have been conducted. The last I've heard, no one was told in a TTSA stockholder meeting about the results or anything. And when I asked TTSA, they would not tell me a thing. They told me to go through their annual filed paperwork. That was like all I got during that story. And what was frustrating is, anybody who looks at SEC filings for a corporation, you're talking about just a ridiculous amount of stuff to go through. And there was absolutely nothing to answer my question. So I was kind of led on a wild goose chase. So I always say not trying to be long-winded, so I apologize, but hopefully that answered your question, that the TTSA now is not the vision that people invested in 2017.
Yeah, I attended. I'm not a shareholder. A few times I almost put in the minimum, but it went up each time and up each time. And I've got a family, and my wife would have killed me. But I attended one of the recent public calls where you could listen to Tom and Hal Putov discussing upcoming announcements, and it largely focused on the media side of things. Monsters in California, the deal with Lionsgate. Chris Nolan's company, whichever that one is, and I think I might be getting it wrong. It's not Lionsgate, but yeah, it was that sort of. We're looking at getting Secret Machines out and get more books. Paul Anderson, and yeah, it's moved massively in a different direction. And for me, the issue has been Tom DeLonge's lack of communication. He was really happy shouting about investing. He was really happy doing not the podcast circuit. He done some interviews and talking about what they wanted to achieve, and we're all in this together. And like you say, the transparency really seemed to lack from To the Stars. And I think that goes back again to even Garry, like you mentioned, for some of those early interviews from what I heard. But that's kind of hearsay. So yeah, disappointing from To the Stars. However, I kind of watched their media wing with intrigue, and I look forward to Monsters in California to see what Tom puts out, because he clearly knows some things that we're not privy to, just in the circles he walked in. And to see how he puts that across on the big screen, maybe as a different form of disclosure, and we're yet to see.
Mm-hmm.
John, I want to do a bit of an impromptu quickfire round with you, because I've got some listener
Sure.
questions I do want to get to, and a load of topics that I could be here for 2 hours more with you. First off, Gary Nolan's interview on Tucker Carlson got rave reviews from people. Again, I stay out the politics of it. I'm not based in the US. I don't particularly know or care about people's leanings left or right. I stay out of that stuff in the UK because politicians are politicians. For me, they all end up doing the same kind of things anyway. However, Gary Nolan, I thought, came across really well. I think he's really charismatic. He knows how to speak to his audiences, and he can take himself up. He can bring himself down. He mentioned particularly, though, pilots and personnel who have medical records that were classified after incidents where they were injured, allegedly, by UAP. Army was denying medical benefits. That was the Rendlesham incident that was being talked about. Are there things there that you've heard you can FOIA or plan to FOIA based on those records being discussed?
Sure. So medical records are completely off limits to FOIA, so there's no way to really confirm that. To kind of go to Dr. Nolan's point, he's likely referring to John Burroughs and the Rendlesham incident, and the medical effects that he had after, and the trouble that he had to access his own medical records. But when it comes to FOIA and anything medical, it's off limits. So to your question, nothing I or any FOIA requester could do. You need to go to the person that the medical records are about, and then file requests in different ways.
Cool. NASA is obviously entering the game. Bill Nelson, administrator, has been briefed on the subject in his previous role within government, and is now pushing things forward. It seems on the outset they've got their own independent study has been announced. How do you see this going? Do you think this is a temporary measure? You mentioned counterintelligence, whatever kind of counterintelligence operation this could be. Are NASA part of that? Or are NASA just jumping on the bandwagon they see rolling down the hill?
Well, I have really dug in on NASA documents. I've done quite a few presentations about them, simply because I've received now literally thousands of pages from NASA seeing their inner workings. I believe that there's an aspect of NASA that really is concerned about these phenomena, that they are cleared from a security clearance angle to hear more, including, and obviously, Director Nelson. But the problem with the public study is that they are not venturing into a classified arena. And in short, to make it very quick, that, in my opinion, from a scientific perspective, flaws the study. And why I say that is because the people that are involved publicly in the study, they are not touching on classified data, and they are not encroaching in the classified arena. So if their sensors pick up something that potentially is classified, the way that everything that I've read thus far, they will not be cleared to solve that mystery. So from a scientific perspective, what does that do? And for me, that will skew the data. That will skew the statistics, because to an uncleared individual working on a program or a study that will become public, and they were touting, nothing classified here, no clearance requirement, this is all, essentially unclassified. That's great. But to properly do a scientific study of these phenomena, you have to understand that you're going to run into something classified. What is it, the X-37 that's up there, or something of that nature, that if NASA's sensors pick something up that they shouldn't, that you need to be cleared to understand that particular event is something classified, solved, but classified, so not necessarily unidentified. So for me, I think the NASA study is flawed. I'm sure the NASA scientists will disagree with me on that, but if you're using instrumentation and data that's up there looking at us, you are going to capture something eventually of classified nature. So to deny yourself that data and access, in my opinion, you flawed the study.
Taking a brief step outside of the conversation we've been having, what do you think of the idea that consciousness has a role to play in the connection with the UFO subject? Is this something you've come across often within the documents you receive?
Not within the documents that I receive. From what I've heard from other people who have experienced things, yeah, it seems like consciousness plays a role in this. Definitely outside of my wheelhouse of expertise, but I think I've heard it more than enough times outside of documents to not be surprised to one day learn consciousness plays a role.
You sort of touched on this earlier, but I think this is a nice one to narrow down. Do you think ultimately there is an element of this phenomenon which is extraterrestrial and is visiting Earth?
I'm sorry, it kind of broke up in my ear there. Can you say that one more time?
Bad timing. Do you think there's an element of this phenomenon which is extraterrestrial and is visiting Earth?
Yeah, and sorry about it. It probably was bad timing, but my
That's all right.
earpiece kind of garbled there. So for me, I'm a type of person that needs to see to believe. And I've never had an experience where I've looked at something and went, you know what, that is otherworldly. It's extraterrestrial. So that's my personal answer. I don't know. When you look at the information and you look at the documentation, I can tell you as a researcher, the researcher part of me can't rule it out. I believe that there's enough documented evidence to support that there's technology beyond what America and even the world will admit to. I think that there is technology that is being displayed in documentation that is years, if not in some cases, decades beyond what it is at the time. One particular quick example was I did a small write-up and video on this, was that if you calculate the speed of what was seen and also verified on radar, it was like 50 years advanced of how it was performing. So there's enough cases of that where you look at it and go, okay, is this really all some massive cover up of classified technology, whether it be British, American, Japanese, Chinese, or Russian, or is this something else? So I've seen enough to not rule it out, and it's on the table. Can I tell you I'm convinced? No, I cannot.
John, let's fire through some listener questions, and thank you to everyone who sent these over. We do have about 4 James and Jamies, but they are all different people. It just happened to be a popular name getting in touch with you, John. So we'll kick off with a James. Could you ask John what congressional correspondence can be FOIA'd that might give insight into recent classified briefings? Is it handled differently than DOD classification? And any avenues you can think of for stuff to quote-unquote slip out?
So congressional records are off limits to FOIA. If they communicate with an agency, it's open season. You can FOIA those. Can you learn stuff from classified briefings? Likely not in their correspondence. They likely will not, in a unclassified correspondence, send a document over. Generally, what you're going to learn in my experience with this, and I've dug in on a couple briefings, is that you're going to learn more from the internal planning and banter of that briefing than from the congressional side, if that makes sense. So you FOIA emails, you FOIA material. I've received one of the PowerPoint presentations, heavily redacted, but one of the PowerPoint presentations of a classified UAP briefing. So that's where you're going to learn what's going on in the briefing. One last thing quickly I'll throw out, which I haven't really talked about this much, but I have an open case for what I discovered through NASA, going back to NASA records, was a recorded but classified presentation by Jay Stratton, who at the time was the head of the UAP task force. He recorded the classified briefing for people like NASA Director Bill Nelson to watch at his own leisure. The minute I had that in writing, it made it open season for me to go after it, because now I know it exists. It's not a congressional record, and it is FOIA-able. So I have an open case for that. So that's where you're really going to get the secrets, not from the congressional side, because FOIA can't touch them.
I'll say, James, thank you for your question. That was answered by John before about what he thinks the phenomena may be, multiple things. Strafe, your question was answered about NASA before. Thank you very much. Question from Barry. Barry asks, has John come across any hint of other classified government UAP projects, alternative to ATIP or OSAP, that may be hiding crashed UAP vehicles or studying them?
Not on the crashes. And I've looked, I've tried to get people on the record that have made those claims, like a Dr. Eric Davis, who doesn't care for me much, but getting those types of people on the record with sworn statements is key to trying to find those crash retrievals. And nobody has done that. So when it comes to crash retrievals, no. When it comes to UFO investigation programs, I had discovered an Air Force manual in early 2000 that had no program name per se, but it was a full outline on Air Force pilots reporting UFO sightings in the air, how to report them, what to jot down, where to send it to, and so on. And that was on the books for quite a few years. And for quite a few years, I tried to track down what records were submitted under that Air Force manual. Specifically, it was called 10-206. And they're essentially all forwarded to NORAD, which is off limits to the FOIA. So how convenient that the one place that was receiving all of the Air Force UFO encounters is off limits to the FOIA. I eventually went through the Canadian government, got stacks of UFO sighting reports. Specifically, they're called CIRVIS reports, CIRVIS. And it kind of proved that NORAD was lying to me. So not necessarily a project, going back to that question, but there have definitely been very, I would say, rarely bantered about protocols for reporting UFOs that the results are seemingly kind of elusive, that they're putting these documents in places that the FOIA can't touch.
This next question, John, I think some of your haters might think you've sent this one in yourself under an alias, but this is from Tom, and I'm going to read it word for word. Everyone knows John Greenwald Jr. is the king of the FOIA request. My question is, are there parts of the government that are exempt from FOIA? And if you could ask a forbidden department a question, what department would you ask and what would the question be?
That's funny that you said that. The king part was Luis Elizondo. That's a call to, he's the one that said that. Is the middle part of that question a part of the FOIA? And can you word that again? Not
Oh yeah,
touched?
so it was are there parts of the government that are exempt from FOIA? You did
Yeah.
mention before, like NORAD, for
NORAD. Yeah,
example.
gotcha.
Yeah.
And the other part would be the White House.
Okay.
Everything else from a federal level, again, Congress is excluded, but federal agencies, military branches, they are all subject to FOIA on the federal and military level.
So the speculative part of the question is, if you could ask a forbidden department a question, what department would you ask, and what would the question be?
Right now, there's a lot of different topics I deal with, but obviously we're here talking about UFOs. I think right now that my pressing question would be to the Air Force. And the question would be, where are you guys? Where are you in this conversation? Because I mentioned the 2000 manual. They, at the time, were the only ones with a manual talking about UFOs. Now, fast forward 20 plus years, they're the ones that are absent from the UFO conversation, yet everybody else seems to be in it. So I think right now, if you were to ask me in August of 2022, I'd go to the Air Force and go, where are you guys in this conversation?
Question from Jaden, and this one's a little bit more speculative, so it might be one for the 15-year-old John. I'd like to know what John's thoughts are on what these UFOs are here to do, as I imagine you would have spent a lot of time thinking about this over the decades.
I think the easy answer would be to watch. And why I say that is you can put in an extraterrestrial origin or a foreign power origin, and that answer will work. So it's a safe way to put it. I think reconnaissance, again, no matter the source, is something that we are seeing here, because with the military reports, they're above military exercises, training exercises. They're going into military bases. So I think it's safe to say that whatever this technology is, regardless of the source, reconnaissance is a big part of it. This is a different show, but I mean, if for speculation reasons, if there is that extraterrestrial route to all of this, why would they come here? And the biggest question for me is, why would they care? And that for me is one of the biggest and hardest questions to tackle, that we would think that they're watching us and so on, but why? Like, why would they care? It's I use the anthill analogy. Do we fly out to the middle of the Sahara to watch an anthill colony and not say anything and just look? Or do we go down and plant a flag and say, hey, we're here to share technology with you? No. So there's a lot of, in that speculative way to look at it, there's a lot of unanswered and very difficult aspects to tackle of that question, because the human race is very egotistical. We want to believe that aliens would come and save us from our own nuclear warheads, right? And well, they can't have nuclear power because that makes them a threat to the galactic neighborhood. No, it doesn't. I mean, that's a grain of sand into an ocean, I mean, nuclear weapons to a civilization that's traversing the stars is nothing. But it's egotistical for us to think they want to save us. And it's a fascinating question to explore, which I will spare you from me going out on the tangent, but it is fun to speculate because we don't have the answer to it. And we want to believe certain things. We just, in my opinion, can't blindly accept them.
We'll keep the speculation for the next appearance, John, because I'd love to have you back on. Two more
Of course.
questions, though.
Sure.
One of the other Jameses. James asks, what is the most likely scenario you see unraveling and being disclosed in the next 5 years? So where do you see the topic going in that 5-year time frame?
Contrary to what I think people believe right now, I believe secrecy is deepening. I believe it's actually provable that secrecy has deepened. Where I think we're going to be in 5 years, I mean, I hope we have more hearings, and won't surprise me if we do. It won't surprise me if we have more reports. That's great. The problem is what will we get in the reports? And I'm not sure. When you look at the secrecy and how they handle it, specifically a document I got late last year proves my point. It's called the Security Classification Guide. And essentially what an SCG is that it takes any particular topic that's important to classification and outlines how and when and in what protocols to classify information. That's a nutshell way to put it. This was specifically on UAP. Almost the entire thing is redacted. They do not want to share anything on UAP. Anything on UAP is automatically classified. We know this because we have it in writing from the Pentagon spokespeople that anything that comes in is automatically classified. That means you have to go through legal means to get it. So it's a clear indicator that in the coming months and years, it will be incredibly difficult to extract UAP information. Even though they're saying UAP, even though they're talking generally about it, even though they may even have reports about it, at the end of the day, the specifics are classified. So it's going to be a challenge. I hope I'm wrong, but I think you're just going to see secrecy strengthen and deepen here in the next couple years.
Something that we should hear more about in the future is the final question from Mike. Have you put in a FOIA request for anything related to Lue Elizondo's IG complaint?
I have. The IG complaint itself is exempt. That's exemption B7. Essentially, if they do take it to a investigation level, then that's one angle. If they don't, that's another. But regardless, it is exempt from release. So I was denied it coming out. Obviously, the New York Post put it on their YouTube channel, and you can download it from there. Redacted. I guess the New York Post had redacted names that were not public, so you can get it in that way. I did get emails. So for those who missed that story, I had received internal communications within the DOD IG that were about Luis Elizondo and his complaint. I can prove that he was interviewed, even though we already knew that he had said it. But that's really kind of the only thing in the emails revealed. I pointed out some other things, but again, another show for you. But the point I'm trying to make is that it's very hard to get information on his complaint. Just this morning of the recording of this with you, I'm working on a video about his complaint and doing a deep dive into the complaint, the claims therein, the names we can see, and just kind of really exploring in depth. I talked to the Department of Defense Office of the Inspector General today. I talked to them about the UAP evaluation they announced last year. They say that it is still ongoing and that they have no ETA on completion. Since I had their ear, I asked them about the Elizondo complaint. And I said, can you guys confirm that an investigation even has taken place? Because that was claimed in the Daily Mail that Garry Reed was ousted, claimed by Luis Elizondo, that is, that his complaint triggered that. If that was true, then an investigation has taken place and completed. They're not going to take action on an investigation that's ongoing. They will not confirm or deny they're doing anything with it. So it's very, very difficult to get information on. So I wanted to at least tell you that I'm still pushing, but to your listener's question, it's near impossible to get anything for personal privacy reasons and law enforcement reasons.
But you've got a video about that on the horizon, which are always useful for people to watch.
I just finished the slide deck. For the most part, finished it probably last night. I would say it's done. So we'll see. I'm set to record it hopefully soon. But with my slide decks, I always edit and do more. And then it's never good enough. I'm kind of OCD in that way. So hopefully, though, I'll be able to really finalize it. But last night, I think I'm comfortable with it, and I'll record the video, and we'll see what people think. People have been really requesting the deep dive. I think it's interesting. I mean, I think that there's a lot of question marks from the IG complaint once it came out. So my aim is just to kind of deep dive into it, go through it, and kind of point out some of the question marks that are in there.
Well, there was a lot of things I would have loved to have got to with you, but just time constraints. You've been very generous with your time, and
no problem.
This will already go out in two parts. The Guy Hottle memo video you've just released was really interesting. I watched that today. Shades of the Wilson David memo within the discussion of that as well. So I recommend people check that one out. I'll put the link in description. I'm sure many of you already subscribe to the Black Vault on YouTube and check out the website. Make sure you do. Again, all those details will be in the description. John, it's been great having you on, and I certainly look forward to having you on again in the future.
My pleasure. I had a blast. Thank you.
if, like me, you have ever had to go looking for a designer, illustrator, or voiceover artist, it can be difficult to know where to start. That's where the folks at Fiverr have created the world's largest marketplace for digital services, with an incredible database of talented freelancers to cover every one of your business needs. Whether you need a new website, a voiceover for your podcast, or someone to manage your social media accounts, Fiverr has you covered. The unique term for a service offered by a seller on Fiverr is called a gig. When creating gigs, sellers can choose their starting price point. Sellers can take this a step further and offer gig packages to buyers using those gig packages. These contain multiple price ranges, and sellers can offer buyers various and tailored service packages. In this way, buyers can pick and choose from all that's offered according to their particular requirements. There truly is something for every budget, with your payments protected every time. That's really important. Your payment won't be released until you approve the work, so there's no paying for work that isn't of the required standard, giving you the complete control you need to get the perfect product for your business. And for more peace of mind, Fiverr's support team are available 24/7 to answer any questions or provide the help you need. So, if you've been fishing around the net for the right solution, stop. Use the perfect solution and go to Fiverr, that's Fiverr, and find the perfect freelance services for your business today. You can help support this podcast by using my special link, zen.ai/UFO5, that's zen.ai/UFO and the number 5, the next time you need to book a freelancer. Details are in the description. That is all for this week's show. Thank you very much for listening. Please remember to leave the podcast a review on your chosen platform. You can like, retweet and subscribe. That would all be very much appreciated. The shows are being uploaded onto YouTube as we speak more and more. You can sign up at patreon.com/thatUFO podcast to access the shows ad-free as well. Please get in touch on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, That UFO Podcast. Of course, on Twitter, it's at UFO UAPAM. And again, folks, as always, keep looking up. You never know what you might see.
It wasn't a Tic Tac and not quite a saucer, more like a hubcap designed by Chaucer, a little baroque and quite steampunk, like Alice was playing bass for the Parliament of Folk. The little fucker hovered right outside of my window, and when I shoved out the screen, he made it an issue. I don't think he expected me to see his ass, but I'd had some champagne and smoked a little around. Meditative game of state full on meta. You can't imagine how it could have been any better. I got to the top of the stairs and there he was. Like, you awake? I was about to abduct you, cuz. I jumped back and nearly kissed myself, and I climbed out the window after the elf, and I woke up in my bed and there was something on my head and everything was weird and everything was red. And I called out to my boys. They thought this was noise. They thought it was a dream. They thought it was my toys. They thought it was my problems, and they think I should seek therapy, and I don't know what to do because it doesn't really scare me. If you really want to know who I think I be, I think it's you and me and us and we and him and her and that and she and that thing over there and what's that, Jake? But for being serious, open your mind, consider your heart, consider time, consider your space, consider your lies, consider your life, consider your eyes.